Welcome to Understanding Islam. My name is Hewer, and I'm going to be presenting this series of programs to build up into a whole way of understanding something about Islam and the way of life of Muslims. As each of these programs is broadcast, it will be available on demand on the Ahl al-Bayt website, so it can be downloaded and people can catch up on earlier episodes if they've missed them. To go with each episode, there will also be an article available to be downloaded from my own website. This series begins with 12 episodes looking at the big picture of understanding Islam. Every 4 weeks, we will have a question and answer session, and you are most welcome to email in questions that I will address on this extended program every 4th week. This week we're going to address the question, what is Islam? Last week we established that there is only one God, and that this is the central aspect, the central belief of Islam. What do we know, though, about this one God? Well, of course, God exists before time begins. God alone is eternal. So we could say we know nothing about God until God does something, until God becomes the creator. Once God becomes creator, then we have a creation. Then we can begin to talk about God. And so we need to begin our discussion by asking, what is the relationship between God the Creator and the creation? Well, we can see first of all that that is not a relationship of equals, because God the Creator and the creation are not equal in a partnership. God creates everything as perfect as it can be. Now, God alone is perfect because God is outside of time and outside of space. God never gets older. God never wears out like we creatures do. So God alone is perfect, and the creation that God creates is as perfect as it can be within the confines of time and space. What sort of a relationship, then, can we see between the Creator and the creation? It is a relationship of harmony, of balance, of due order, of the right proportions, everything in its right place. It's a relationship of safety and of security, a relationship of justice and of peace, everything according to the great designer's plan. Therefore, a relationship of security and abiding peace. Everything according to the great designer's plan means everything learning its place and following it through. That means it includes obedience, submission to the divine will. We can say that that means learning that I am not God. God is the creator, and I am a creature of God, and therefore need to be dependent, obedient upon God. God is both creator and sustainer. Everything that exists is in this relationship with God. If we take all those elements in the relationship between the Creator and the creation, we can sum them up all in one Arabic root. Arabic is the kind of language in which most words are formed around three-letter roots. So we can take the root SLM, and that root carries with it all those meanings that we see between God and the creation. When we want to make words, we start to add vowels. So you can see that we add vowels and we can make the word Islam. We can make the word Muslim, and we can make the word Salam. Now, the three-letter Arabic root runs all the way through those three words. Therefore, they belong to a family of words. They carry that same meaning with them. Now we can ask the question, well, what is Islam? Islam is that natural state of balance and order and harmony and peace and safety and security and justice, which is the way that God created the world, which is the way that God intended that the world should be, and which can only come about when every element within the creation operates according to the great designer's plan. That is, when everything is obedient to God. That is Islam. Therefore, we can say God creates the world in the state of Islam. The word Muslim, then, comes from the same root, and it is the personal adjective that comes from the word Islam. Something in the state of Islam is Muslim. Therefore, we can say God creates the world in the state of Islam. God creates a Muslim universe. Everything that God creates is created Muslim in its original first creation. The difficulty, of course, is that we creatures live in time and space, and so over a period of time, we don't function as well as we did earlier on. I'm not as good at sports now as I was 30 or 40 years ago. That's the nature of being a creature. Things deteriorate and don't work so well. So the world starts off, the whole universe, created by God in this perfect state of Islam. The human beings are part of that creation. We are, if you like, the top of the pyramid of creation, part of it and yet special at the same time. Now we can ask the question, well, when did Islam begin? Islam began at the very first moment at the beginning of creation. Everything that God created was created in the state of Islam. That's the beginning of the story. You remember that we have a third word made from the root SLM, and that is the word salam. If you've heard Muslims greeting one another, often people will say, Salam alaikum, and the other will reply, Wa alaikum salam. We often translate this just to mean, peace be with you, and peace be with you too. But of course, this word peace is derived from the same three-letter root, and so we can say more accurately, may you come to that most perfect and abiding peace, which is the way that God intended it to be, which is the way in which you will flourish as a human being, and which will only come about when you and the rest of creation live according to the great designer's plan. No better greeting can there be than that. Now, if I am in harmony and peace and safety and security with God, in obedience to God, and so are you, that must mean that we ought to be in harmony with each other. And so we have a harmony vertically with God, but also a harmony horizontally with the rest of humankind, with the rest of creation. So the whole of creation should be living in the state of Islam, according to the great designer's plan. The whole of creation should be living in the state of Islam, not just human beings. The mineral world, the vegetable world, the animal world, all these were created Muslim. Well, the planets are Muslim. They follow their orbits in the sky. They go around and round as God intended. Rivers flow downhill. Well, you could say they obey the law of gravity. That's just another way of saying that's the way that God intended it to be. Minerals are Muslim. We can think of iron, for example. It has certain characteristics. It is attracted by a magnet. We could think of lead. It has a certain density. It has a certain malleability. These are the properties given to them by the Creator. The vegetable world is Muslim. The trees, the flowers, the plants, the vegetables are all Muslim. If we think about daffodils or sunflowers, for example, they come up, they grow, and we know that after a short time, they turn and face toward the sun. A scientist would say, oh, but they are phototropic. They turn toward the light. But that's just another way of saying that's the way that God made them. That's the way that they are. In the same way, birds fly, fishes swim, animals run across the ground, so the whole of creation in its natural state is, according to the great designer's plan, in the state of Islam. When we turn then to look at the human being, we can see the human being as part of this natural Islamic universe. The natural way for human beings to live is according to the great designer's plan. We might call this Din al-Fitra, that is, the natural way of human life. In this natural life, human beings will flourish. They will prosper. They will live in harmony with themselves and with the rest of creation. We will be fully human. We will live in a state of peace. First of all, peace with God, peace with the rest of creation, but also peace within ourselves. And so Islam understands itself to be the natural God-given way for human beings to live, so that they may live in a state created and intended by God. We can say, if you like, that every human being has an Islam-shaped vacuum within them, and that vacuum will be filled the more and more they live according to the great designer's plan. And so one way of thinking about this material as we understand more about Islam is to ask, does it resonate with me? I, as a human being, do I see that there is something here that makes some kind of sense? This is the way that Muslims would want to understand and explore the Islamic way of life, the Din al-Fitra. Now, from the beginning, we can talk about Islam as the natural generic state for the whole of creation. But of course, over the many centuries since the creation of the world, God has sent various prophets and various scriptures to the world to guide human beings to live according to this way. We can say that up until the time of the coming of Muhammad and the last scripture, the Quran, there were many different editions, many different forms of Islam around the world. But with the coming of Muhammad and the coming of the Quran, the last and definitive guidance has been sent to the earth. From this time onwards, it's as though we can say we are moving from small I Islam to capital I Islam, from small m Muslim to capital M Muslim. Now we have the last and definitive edition of the perennial guidance. We've been talking a lot today about God as creator. So let's ask a critical question. God creator, God sustainer in a relationship with the whole of the creation. We can see this relationship as a bit like being the electricity that powers the light bulb. Without the electricity, without being connected to the source, the light bulb is useless. It's just a glass globe. It is that sustaining power of God that keeps up a constant relationship with the whole of creation. So now let's ask our critical question. What do Muslims think about evolution? Can there be Muslim evolutionists? Well, the vast majority of Muslims alive today would be what we would normally call creationists. That is, that God creates the world in its existing form. The Quran doesn't go into great details. How long a time period did it take for God to create the world? In what order were the elements of creation created? These questions are not answered by the Quran. It cuts straight to the most important thing. God creates everything by the divine word of command. Let there be. Let there be light. There's light. Let there be a four-footed animal called a sheep. And there's an animal called a sheep. And so on. So it is by the divine word of command that everything is created. So, can there be Muslim evolutionists? Well, of course, in reality, there are. There are some Muslim scholars who, over the last few decades, have tried to work from Islamic principles with a theory of evolution. And we can see 4 things that they have to keep within their discussion if they want to try to be true to Islam. First of all, whatever happened at the beginning, it was God who was responsible. God begins the whole process, and the whole process is in a relationship with God. God says be, and it was. Secondly, God is in a relationship at all times with the creation. So God is directing and controlling the development of the creation. We can't have just random natural selection in a way that things just seem to happen. No, God is in control. There has to be a great designer's plan. Thirdly, we have got to be able to talk about the uniqueness of the human being. In some way, we've got to say, that is human, and that which went before it is not human. Now, wherein lies this human uniqueness? And over the many centuries, different Muslim scholars have answered this question in different ways. Some will talk about the infusion of a human soul and not an animal soul. Some have talked about being able to have consciousness as a human being. Today, some people talk about the use of language or the use of tools. But in some way, we have to be able to say that human being is unique. And then fourthly, we have in the Quran talk of Adam and his wife, Adam and Eve. And so we have to fit Adam and Eve within any discussion about human creation, human evolution. This reminds us that the scientists who talk about evolution, whether they are believing religious people or not, are always changing and developing in their own understanding. Sometimes they talk about human beings being created from proto-parents, a first set of parents who, as it were, emerged. And so we hear the comment, human life emerges out of Africa. Now, it's not my job to solve the question about evolution, creation, and Islam. But it's a good example of the way in which we can see, firstly, Muslims are not afraid to ask critical scientific questions as they come up within human society. And secondly, not all Muslims think and believe the same. Different groups of Muslims answer these questions in different ways, and our knowledge is always expanding. In the next episode, we will address the question, what is it then to be human? What's so special about being human? And you are very welcome to send in questions by email for the monthly question and answer session on Ahl al-Bayt television.